In our first reading today, Amos is a reluctant prophet, as most prophets are. He was a farmer with no desire to cause the trouble that prophets typically cause. But God called him, and he had to respond. In our gospel today, Jesus sends his disciples out 2 by 2 and calls them as well. He tells them that they now have authority to offer repentance, to cast out demons, and heal the sick. Each of these readings, our first reading and our gospel, are very short and simple and to the point. God calls and they go, reluctant or not, and spread God's message. In our baptism, which is also quite simple and really quite short, we are given that exact same call as Amos and the disciples. Like Amos, we are baptized to be prophets that speak in the face of injustice, prophets that have a keen eye for when the world is not operating within God's framework and work for compassion and justice. Prophets must speak. And like the disciples, we have been given authority. We are royalty. In our baptism, we are told that we are baptized as kings. And that means that we are people of authority like God's authority, servant leaders that are here to bring healing and restoration to the world. We are restorers of community, we are bridge builders, and we are healers. This is our call, priest, prophet, and king. Following God's call, though, seems pretty difficult. It seems complex. And my call and that journey to follow that call does not ever seem short and simple like it was for Amos or the disciples. For many of us who were raised Catholic, a calling meant, are you going to get married and have kids? Are you going to be a priest? Or are you going to be a nun or single? Those questions drove me crazy as a teenager, thinking I needed to figure one of those out. And these were the options, though, and they were permanent, and that was that. And even in our secular Western culture, we have a similar notion of calling. We might not always use the word calling, but there's the similar idea and pressure that at a very young age, you need to know what you're going to do. What will you be? Will you be a teacher, an engineer, an electrician? I've heard these ideas referred to as our big C calling. But I don't know if they really are the big C calling in our lives. They seem more so kind of the backdrop of how we actually live the bigger calling in our lives. Because the disciples were fishermen and they were most likely single. Amos was a farmer. These were part of their identity, but it wasn't so much their call. Their call was much bigger than those things. It was about how they were going to live out that call to be prophet, priest, and king. I'm married, and I'm a mother. I've been a mother for about 1/5 of my life. So is that my calling? Is that what was happening in the other 37 years of my life? I don't know if I was necessarily called to be a wife and a mother, or if in some ways that was just the society and the way that we function as a society. But what I do know is that God has called me to treat my husband with kindness, even though we don't see eye to eye all the time. And God calls me to help teach my daughter what it means to live in community and to help and care for one another. This is how I am a priest, prophet, and king in my different identities. And there are so many ways that we can be priest, prophet, and king. You can be those as an electrician or an engineer or a mom, and they can also shift and change over time. They are not static in the way that sometimes we're taught to believe they are. There's another way that I think we get in the way of our own selves of living out our call. Another way we get preoccupied. Does anyone here watch Portlandia? I was afraid I wasn't going to get any hands raised. Shoot. All right. Google Portlandia. It's hilarious. There's one, if you Googled probably Portlandia and backpacking or hiking, you'll get this skit of this couple that decide they want to go hiking. And so they're sitting at their kitchen table early one morning, and they're like, yeah, let's go hiking. This is a great day to go hiking. And they say like, oh, but you know what? We need hiking boots. Well, of course. So they go to REI and they get their hiking boots. And then they come back home and they're like, oh, but we need hiking poles, right? So they go back to REI and they get their hiking poles, and they're like, well, it might rain. So they go back to REI and they get their raincoats, and they do this all day until their whole house is filled with everything they need, but now it's nighttime and they never went hiking. And I think so often that can be the way we operate within our call, within the longings within our heart. We just have such a knack to make them so complicated, and we're so good at preparing and never actually going forward. I was thinking about when George Floyd was murdered, and I wanted to do something. It was the height of COVID. I didn't feel comfortable being down there and risking getting my daughter sick, and just wasn't sure what to do. And so I thought, well, you know what? As someone with resources, I could donate money, and I could donate money to an organization that supports marginalized people that were impacted by everything that happened on Lake Street. And so I did some Googling. I talked to some friends that are active in social justice causes. I had some other people give me some different ideas. I talked to my husband, thought about what I should donate. And you know what? I never donated. I thought about it. I researched it. I was excited. And then life moved on and I got distracted. And I do believe that I was called to do something in that moment. And honestly, I did nothing. I was not a prophet in any way in that moment. There are places in our time to research and think critically, but I would guess that most of us, either knowingly or unknowingly, use that as a convenient way not to act. We post things on Facebook, we say things about working for justice, but what do we actually do? Rather, we should just pick the one thing, choose it, simply go and act, whether or not our ducks are all in a row, because they never will be. And then we need to just move forward in action. And there are times when it's going to all come together and it's going to feel so good, and there's times when it's not and it's going to fall apart. There's times when we're not going to be welcomed, and there's times that we're going to just eventually have to walk away, to shake the dust off our sandals and keep moving. And that's okay, because we are called to do the work, but Jesus is the one that's finishing it. Jesus is the one that's making that final plan going forward. And I know that right now, Jesus is in this room. And he says that when 2 or more are gathered in his name, that he is here. And if that's the case, then Jesus is also here telling us to go. To go and do things that wouldn't be done without us. Just as our closing prayer says every week, that there are words of healing that will not be spoken unless we do them. Acts that will not happen unless we do them. So let us go. Let us be unprepared. Let's stumble over our words and make mistakes. And God is going to be in all of that. Because God will work through us in all of what we are. And he will bring healing and love and forgiveness. This is our calling, to heal, to build bridges, and bring forgiveness. And it's simple. And if the only thing that is ever written or known about this church is that the people of Spirit of Hope went out and shared healing and forgiveness to the world, then our calling would be complete. There is nothing more that we need to do. And we don't need to know how the story ends, nor do we need to be discouraged when it doesn't work out the way we think it is. We just need to keep walking together, 2 by 2 or 3 by 3, and live out our call, short and simple.